Hey, Britton. Hi, Whitney. Welcome to Harc.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, unique setup these days, but
yeah,
it's
I'm
okay.
Amanda. I'm Amanda Parr. I'm the chair of the commission.
Nice to meet you, Amanda, in a roundabout sort of way.
So Britton Faustine just texted me. Not that I mean we have the plan for tonight, but baby has not been cooperative today. So
Oh,
yeah, I told her we were good.
that's just cute, happy words. Probably not if you're mom, but maybe for the rest of us, that's cute, happy words.
I've been there. I know what she's going through.
Yeah, I think this is week 2, so you know. Britton, I'm also going to, I read through my normal script and it focuses on the public hearing. So I'll just amend that.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, we don't do this as often, and there will be a public hearing, so we'll have that opportunity in 2 weeks.
Right.
And the public does have the opportunity to speak tonight. We have a special part of the agenda for that, so we'll get everybody oriented during the beginning part, and then we only have one item tonight for Harc's consideration, besides the minutes, of course. So.
Okay.
Yeah, the owner will be on tonight. He may be a few minutes late, so I let him know that Britton, y'all would be kind of getting started first, and then hopefully by the time he can jump on, he can hear any of y'all's formal comments and comments from any public participants if they join in. Otherwise, I will either fill him in, or if it happens to be recorded, I can get that to him if y'all do record them.
We do. So all the meetings that we have are recorded, and we'd be able to provide that if needed.
Okay.
So one of the handier things about this meeting format is it lends itself better to being recorded, so we can go back and review notes.
That's great. Well, he hopes to join us, and I hope he'll be able to. So
great.
Another commitment this evening, so he's juggling like most of us parents and otherwise.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Terry. Hey, Art.
Is there a chance that we will not have a quorum?
I don't think so, but
Okay. Okay. I hope everyone is doing well.
Art, do you have football to watch tonight?
Lady, as long as it lasts. Yes, yes. There is a college game and then the NFL game. And so my eldest son's birthday was the 13th of September. And so for his birthday, I wished him a full football season.
I am here to get behind that. A full and healthy one.
Yes, 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 yes. It brings us somewhat closer to what we perceive to be normal.
Yes, agreed.
And Terry, how are you? How are you?
I am good. How are you?
Good, good.
I'm very busy. I'm deep into homeschooling and working full time. So it's a very challenging time for me.
Beautiful. Okay, okay.
Push
And
my-
there is a face I haven't seen in a while.
I was just thinking the same. Hi, how are you guys doing?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm good.
Let's see.
I'm in the same boat as Terry. You know, we're just hunkering down, doing a lot of work, and school's still at home right now. So,
and so you're having to adjust to a completely different way of life. Huh?
yes, I am. I'm grateful that I have the opportunity, but it is a different change of pace. It's a different change of pace for sure.
Okay.
How have you been, Art?
Huh?
How have you been?
No major complaints. I wake up in the morning and the body moves and I'm good.
That is good. That is very good. I'm glad to hear that.
Hello, Johnson.
How's everybody doing? Great. Wonderful. Glad to hear that.
Fairly well.
okay. Are we expecting are we missing other commissioners? Is there anyone that we know is not attending this evening? I know Faustine cannot attend. Is there anyone else? Or should we wait a couple minutes for, what we were missing? Carolee? Who else?
Shirley was not going to be able to attend, I believe.
Okay.
But what about Pam?
Pam is here now.
Pam. Yeah.
I'm here.
Okay. Hey, Pam.
Hi.
Okay. Is Robert going to be joining us to listen in to this evening?
I don't think we got any indication he wasn't.
No, he won't.
He's not. Okay. Thank you, Myrna. Okay. Okay. So are we ready to get started? Who do we have, Nat? Do we have, looks like we have some of the public, one person from the public.
Yeah, it looks like we have two folks from the design team, Whitney, and we also have Shane. It looks like part of the applicant owner team might be here. Travis Pertheus is here. And it looks like we may have one member of the public joining us tonight.
Okay, so Shane is part of the applicant team.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Good evening. I'm Amanda Parr, and I'm the chair of the Georgetown Historic and Architectural Review Commission. The time is 6:01 p.m., and I would like to welcome everyone to our meeting of the City of Georgetown Historic and Architectural Review Commission. The Historic and Architectural Review Commission, appointed by the mayor and city council, is responsible for hearing and taking final action on applications for certificates of appropriateness based upon the city council adopted downtown and old town design guidelines and the Unified Development Code. This virtual meeting format is different from the regular meetings at City Hall, but we will still follow a similar meeting format. We will consider the cases scheduled for this meeting individually as follows. Staff will make a presentation of the case, and then I will give the commissioners an opportunity to ask questions to staff. After the staff presentation, the applicant or their representative will have 10 minutes to present or provide comments on their project if they so choose, followed by questions from the commissioners. Tonight is not a public hearing. We will be having a public hearing on this item in 2 weeks. This is a conceptual review. So we will have public comment prior to the start of the meeting minutes, reading the minutes, and before the conceptual review. After everyone who needs to speak has spoken, we will move forward with the applicant and make sure they don't have any following questions. Following the set of questions, we will then, if the applicant or member of the public has questions, we will please communicate those to the recording secretary outside of this meeting so that staff can follow up with you. You can provide your contact information through the Q&A section and request follow-up. You can call the planning department at 512-930-3575, or you can email historic@georgetown.org. I would like to remind everyone to please state your name before you make any comments. That includes staff, commissioners, applicants, and members of the public who speak during the public comment portion of the meeting. If you're a member of the public, please also provide your address. So one thing I would like to clarify is that we do have a quorum of our commissioners. And so any alternates that are present on the phone this evening will not be making comment. Okay, we're going to move forward with item C, which is public comment. Do we have anyone on the phone that is wanting to speak or give public comment this evening? Okay, Nat, not hearing anyone, not seeing anyone?
No, ma'am. No one has contacted me. Myrna is also on the line. I don't believe anyone's contacted her.
Okay, perfect.
We do have some comments, I believe, which were provided to the commission in advance of the meeting.
Okay, I think we received those in our packet. Are we reading those or are we, okay, not reading those. Perfect. Okay, so we will move on. We move on to our next item. Our next item is item D, which is consideration and possible action to approve the minutes from the September 10th, 2020 regular meeting of the Historic and Architectural Review Commission. Does anyone have any edits or amendments to the minutes? Okay, not hearing anyone, not seeing anyone. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes as written.
It's Catherine Morales, and I make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Steve Johnston, I second the motion.
Thank you, Steve. So I have a motion by Commissioner Morales and a second by Commissioner Johnston to approve the minutes as written. Let's take a vote. Commissioner Parr, approve. Commissioner Hyde?
Approve.
Commissioner Browner?
Yes.
Commissioner Morales?
Approve.
And Commissioner Johnston?
Yes.
Thank you very much. That motion carries. Moving forward. All right, I'm going to move on to item E. This is a conceptual review of a request for a certificate of appropriateness for new building construction, infill development at the property located at 405 South Austin Avenue, bearing the legal description 0.7434 acres, being Lot 9, replat of Block 24 in the city of Georgetown. Britton.
Good evening, commissioners. This is Britton Bostick, Downtown Historic Planner for the city of Georgetown. So the request that's coming to Harc is for new building construction, what we also call infill development, and that's within our downtown overlay historic district. Tonight's meeting is a conceptual review, and we don't do these very often, but what we do is offer applicants the opportunity to review a project with Harc, almost a preview, if you will, before it goes to a vote, so that Harc has the opportunity to provide any feedback and comments to the applicant on the design of the building relative to the design guidelines. And so y'all have the chance to ask questions about a project, maybe more in depth, ahead of being asked to make a decision. And so I'm on slide 4, and that is showing a rendering that was provided by the architect this afternoon. So this is a new rendering for y'all and a rendering that shows kind of characteristics of the site and what you could imagine this being if you were in downtown and looking at it. This is kind of from the Austin Avenue perspective, from the sidewalk on Austin Avenue, looking toward kind of the southeast and looking at one of the building entrances. So what I'm going to do is follow a format that's really similar to the staff presentations that you're accustomed to seeing. And then staff is requesting some pretty specific feedback, and we'll go through what we're asking for you to provide feedback on to the applicant. And so this property is at South Austin Avenue between West 5th and West 4th Streets. It's currently a vacant lot, but it sits 1 block north of the historic county jail. And so this is right on Austin Avenue. It's very close to the east edge of the downtown overlay district, where the Old Town overlay district begins. It's surrounded by buildings that are mostly counted as non-contributing, meaning they're not historic structures. A lot of these are new. Directly across Austin Avenue, there's a parking lot. And then the closest historic structures are catty corner across Austin Avenue to the northeast, and then that historic Williamson County Jail is directly to the north on the next block up. And so you can see to the west and to the east, there are residential structures, a mix of high, medium, and low priority. And then this is about 2 blocks north of our blocks around the square. So you can just see a little bit of the Courthouse Square National Register Historic District there at the bottom of the screen. The feedback that staff is requesting from Harc tonight is on the building form and massing, which is in design guidelines 13.3 to 13.6. We're asking for Harc's feedback on the building materials, which is design guidelines 13.8 to 13.12, and then the building proportions, which is design guideline 13.18. And so when we talk about massing, massing is a term in architecture that refers to the perception of the general shape and form, as well as the size of a building. And mass combines with shape to define form. So we're looking at the size relative to the context. And this is what's kind of in our design guidelines, and what the policy is to look at buildings that have a massing that is compatible with or kind of sits nicely with the existing historic structures or existing structures in our downtown overlay district. Building form, I'm gonna quote Louis Henry Sullivan, a very famous architect from the turn of the 20th century. He's kind of famous for saying form follows function, but building form is really the shape of a building and how it's configured to accomplish what the building is being used for. So when we ask about massing and form, we're asking questions about the shape of the building on the site. The architect has provided the proposed site plan. And so what this shows is a bank and office building, 3 stories. This would have a bank drive-through. In the mixed use downtown zoning, office and banking uses are allowed. And then banking drive-throughs are also allowed. This would be, I believe, the 5th bank in our downtown overlay district and the 4th bank with a drive-through. So we have other properties south of this property that also have banking institutions with drive-throughs. This would have an office use on the 2nd and 3rd floors, is what's being proposed. So a parking lot to go with that to provide for their required parking on site. What's a little bit unusual about this site and what we don't always see is the driveways are meant to use the existing access easement. So there's a concrete drive currently that serves the residential properties directly to the east. That's an access easement that belongs to this lot or this property. And so they're meant to share a driveway to have access to the bank parking lot and bank drive-through. So that would not create any new driveways on 4th or 5th Streets or along Austin Avenue. Another feature of the site is they're required to construct the sidewalks along the 3 sides that face streets. So you'll see sidewalk construction proposed as part of this project, and that's illustrated in the rendering that I showed just a little bit ago. So this is a 3-story building that's essentially 3 stories straight up from the ground. This is a building that's proposed to be 40 feet above finished floor. And then at the very tippy top, I'm going to get into some architectural language. So the kind of the roof line that you see is at 47 feet above finished floor. that's a parapet height. And so that is what is kind of a low wall around the roof to screen mechanical equipment or other equipment that might need to go on the rooftop, and also to create some decorative building elements. The building at its highest is 49 feet tall, and that's for the decorative cornices that you see at the center of the building where the art bank is. So this building is showing signage in the elevations, but signage is not actually proposed, that's conceptual. The proposed signage will come in separately under a different application. So that's why we're not asking for your feedback on signage today. And so moving around to the south elevation, this is the elevation that you would see from the bank's parking lot on site, showing that the drive-through area has building on top of it for both floors. And then the materials are consistent. They kind of wrap around the building with the stone proposed for the first floor, and then a combination of stone and stucco for the second and third floors with windows. These would be aluminum storefront windows with big panes of glass in them. And as we go to the east elevation, this is showing what you would see from that driveway access. So this is essentially what you would have as a view from the residential properties directly to the east. This is showing, again, that bank drive-through area with the second and third floors above. And then here's the north elevation. And so the north elevation is, this is from the parking lot. Sometimes I get turned around. This is looking to the south. So this is from the parking lot. You can see where one of the bank entrances is that it would come off of the parking lot. So again, a consistent appearance with the other building facades. And so right now, this is a vacant lot. It wasn't always a vacant lot. And so commissioners, I'll get into the property history when we do the public hearing in a couple of weeks and present some background and some photos for you, as I like to do. But today this is a vacant lot, vacant in that it doesn't have structures, it does have some trees, and then there's right-of-way improvements right there on the corner for pedestrians. But this is looking from the northwest corner across Austin Avenue, and then also looking from the southwest corner across Austin Avenue, just in case you haven't recently had a chance to go by and see what this looks like. And so directly to the west is the city's parking lot, and then directly to the east, we've got residential properties with their garages facing toward the bank. And so I'm going to pause for a moment, commissioners. So that covers what the building looks like. That covers how the building appears and how it might appear from the street facade. And I want to pause just in case there are any questions that I can answer, or if any of the commissioners want to go ahead and make comments, or if you'd like to hold your comments until we go through more of the presentation. I'm happy to do that either way.
Does anyone have any comments they'd like to make now, or would we prefer to move forward with the presentation? Art, I see you've unmuted.
Right, I'm just wondering with regards to the residential there to the east, what is the density?
No, I would have to look that up. So I do know that that is 8 lots. I know it is half a block. I don't know the acreage. So somebody quickly do 120 feet by 240 feet divided by 8 lots.
Okay, are they all single family?
They're essentially single family. What you see a little bit, the garages may help kind of tell the story a little bit. There are the 4 structures to the southern part are all tied together. They're kind of all one structure, but they're 4 separate homes, if you will. And then the 4 structures north of that are individual structures. So there's a combination, which creates 8 total homes, if that makes sense.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So Britton, I have a question about access, but I don't know if you want to address that now, or if you want to continue. This picture is going to give us a viewpoint into how this drive-through is going to, where the access is going to be. So would you prefer to talk about that now or later in the presentation?
Oh, happy to do it now. And if the photos that were on help, or if you'll need to if I need to back up a little bit, I can do that too. So if it's helpful to be here, or if it's helpful to go back to the site plan, either way, if I want to talk about circulation.
Yeah, so my question here would be, how are people turning in off of Austin Avenue? And then I like this picture because my understanding is that they will be accessing through this alleyway and then into what will be the drive-through. So can you talk about that a little here?
Yes. So this, when this property was platted, and so that sounds like a really big term, but really what it means is when the site was configured for development, it was platted or it was organized with boundaries or lots where the west half of this lot is a triangle, or excuse me, it's a rectangle. Add one more side to that. It's a rectangle and it's one single lot. And so what this development is proposed to be on is that one lot that was created for development. The houses sit on 8 lots. And so the east half was divided into 8 smaller rectangles that kind of run horizontally if you're oriented with north being up. And so the way that the people who live in those townhomes access their garages is from this property. There is a access easement that runs along where that paved area is. And that access easement is kind of on this property, but gives the people who have those garages the ability to use it to get to their garages. So if that sounds a little bit confusing, it's because it acts almost as an alleyway. It's not technically an alleyway, it's just a way to access. And so rather than create additional driveways off of Austin Avenue, which would be pretty difficult, or off of 5th Street or 4th Street, this project is proposing to use the existing driveway with that access drive that belongs to this property, and then to take the driveways into the bank drive-through and the bank parking lot from that existing driveway. And so rather than doing new curb cuts for driveways off of 4th Street or 5th Street, it's proposing to use the existing driveway to gain access into the parking and bank drive-through.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions right now, or do we want to move forward? Okay, let's move forward, Britton.
Great. And so one of the things staff is asking for feedback on too is on materials for the project. And so our downtown has a lot of different materials, and those have been developed over the course of almost 170 years at this point. So a lot of our very original buildings were wood. A lot of those have not made it with us, and a lot of the buildings that we enjoy today are brick and stone primarily. And so what you see in our downtown is a lot of different textures, a lot of different colors, and a lot of different materials. What I'm showing on this slide is examples of new infill development, newer buildings, not historic buildings, but buildings that have already been constructed. And so we can see also an example of other new materials that have been installed. Sometimes new materials don't look like old materials because of the time that it's taken to weather those old materials. And so some of our building materials downtown are well over 100 years old, and they bear some of the coloration and some of the color change that comes with that. So I used our new materials as an example. And what I'm showing here is examples of cast stone, of cut stone, of brick, of stucco, and so that you can get kind of a sense that new building materials definitely exist in our downtown. And in some cases, they're a very smooth, consistent texture and color, but in other cases, they provide a lot of three-dimensional texture and a lot of variation. And so the materials that are proposed for this building are, I think, much more consistent, both in their color and in their texture. So these are meant to be very consistent and more smooth-looking materials. And these are provided by the architect as examples of what those materials would look like. So here you can see some cut or cast stone. You do have the mortar joints between the stone blocks that are used, but the surface of it is fairly smooth. Sometimes we see a smooth surface on materials in our downtown. On most of the historic buildings, we see a lot more texture to those material surfaces and also some color variation. And so the architect has also provided examples of what the stucco would look like. And so that's another texture that is pretty smooth and also has a really consistent color. It's usually painted one color, although you could use accent colors on some of the stuccoed material areas. And then the architect has also provided some material samples showing the retaining wall. And if we need to go back to the rendering, I can certainly do that to show where that retaining wall goes. But as far as the building goes, this is showing the dark aluminum storefront that's proposed to be used for those windows on the first, second, and the third floors. And so, all right, so that's to the next part. So I'm going to pause here and see if the commissioners have any questions for staff, or if they'll have any comments about materials, or again, if you want to go ahead and move forward with the presentation, happy to do that.
Okay, questions or comments? Okay, I have numerous questions and comments, but I'm thinking it's going to be best to wait until the end of the presentation, so let's just move forward and then we can take them one by one.
Absolutely, we're almost there. So one of the things that staff was asking for feedback also is on the proposed proportions. And when we talk about proportions, one of the things that our design guidelines points to is asking for building proportions or elements of buildings having a proportion that sometimes the design guideline uses the term human scale, but what we're looking for is proportions that bear similarity or are compatible with proportions of historic structures. And so one of the things that I wanted to highlight for you as an example of that is the upper floor windows. So on the second and third floors are proposed to be a little bit wider than they are tall, where normally in historic buildings, what we would see in our downtown is an upper floor window proportion that would be taller than it is wide. So that's an illustration of one of the differences between kind of historic building appearance and a new building appearance, is that you might see different proportions. And so that was kind of something that we could use to illustrate there are some differences in what's proposed here, and maybe a little bit different than some of the guidance in our design guidelines. And so as you move around the building, and this is showing the three-dimensional renderings, so you can see that the building is really consistent in its appearance. It has some architectural features, especially toward the top. There's a change of materials, so there's this cut stone or cast stone for the bottom, and then a stucco material for the top, stucco for the parapet, and some of the features like the window sills, and then using that very consistent window size on the upper floors, and then also a consistent window size on the first floor. That's a little bit different. It's got a feature that kind of mimics a transom, which is something that you would see more traditionally. And then showing the banking drive-through area with a little bit of covered parking, and then the office area above that. And so then as we go around to the northeast perspective, again, seeing the drive-through, and this is a little bit of more of a view kind of from the bank's proposed parking lot. And so when staff reviewed the application, this is not the kind of final version of the staff report, but what we did provide to you was kind of an assessment based on what the architect had provided to give Harc the opportunity to compare what's proposed to the design guidelines and to our other approval criteria. And so staff's finding was that the proposed project either complied or partially complied. In a couple of places, the approval criteria weren't applicable. So this is not a property with historic structures. There are historic structures on adjacent blocks, but not immediately on this block, and it's not within a National Register historic district. So that criteria didn't particularly apply to this one. And then also no signage is being proposed. Even though it's shown, it's not being proposed for approval at this time. And so that didn't apply here. And so just to recap, and I'm happy to go back to any slides that would be helpful. Specifically, staff is asking for Harc's feedback on the building form and massing, the building materials that are proposed to be used, and then also the building's proportions, and kind of specifically those upper floor windows and relating those to other historic buildings in the downtown. So I am happy to answer questions. The applicant is here. It's the architect, Muster Design, and then we might also see if the property owner has been able to join us. But the architect is here and is also happy to answer Harc's questions.
Okay, thank you, Britton. Does the applicant, either the architect or the owner, is there a presentation that you all would like to give, or are you mainly just wanting to entertain questions from the commission?
I am happy to talk more about the building. Sorry, this is Whitney Kuh. I'm with Mustard Design Architects. I'm the architect of the project. I am more than happy to discuss the project more. I do have some things that I can touch on, but I would like to first entertain any questions that the panel might have to start with so that I can more appropriately respond to those and be able to possibly elaborate through some of my other aspects of my presentation.
Okay, and does the owner of the property wish to say anything at this point?
Scott is on. Scott, you may be muted.
Hi, this is Scott Carr. I apologize. I was having a heck of a time getting on here. But Whitney, I think, is obviously very capable of helping answer any questions, but I will try to do the same as well. I'm actually at my son's football game, so I have not very good service, so I apologize, but I'm going to go ahead and mute myself again and let Whitney take over.
Okay, thank you.
If anyone has any direct questions for me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So first of all, we just want to, we really appreciate the opportunity to do a conceptual. I think it helps our projects be stronger for downtown Georgetown. So we appreciate you doing that. Commissioners, what questions do you have for staff or for the applicant right now? Okay, well, I will get us started. This is probably more for Britton. Britton, I know we had in some of our comments some questions about the courthouse view and that area impact, and specifically about the exemption process required. So could you discuss the courthouse view and how we've assessed that, and then what the exemption process looks like there?
Great question. So this is one of the applications for this project. There are others also, and so one of those is the site development plan. Anytime there's a commercial project proposed or a commercial site change, the city requires a site development plan, and that helps the city to review aspects like drainage, impervious cover, that the city's Unified Development Code requirements are being met, and so that applies citywide. And that the certificate of appropriateness process and application is specifically for properties within our historic districts, our historic overlay zoning districts. And so there is a site development plan application that is, it has been submitted. Those go to the Planning and Zoning Commission for a decision. And so it went before the Planning and Zoning Commission for the first time on September 15th and was part of that meeting agenda. It's not approved yet. For one thing, the certificate of appropriateness has to be approved first, but having that submitted already gives staff the opportunity to go ahead and give feedback on the site design. And that's multiple city staff from multiple city departments. So that's not just the planning department. That process is not completed yet because there are still some details that we're working out, particularly with the civil engineer on some of the site aspects, like the sidewalks, for example. Since constructing sidewalks seems like a really easy thing, but when it's in the city's right of way, we double check a couple of things, and there are just some comments that need to be addressed there. So that's kind of in process. The other thing, because this property is located within what we call our courthouse dome view protection overlay, so that's another kind of special district. We have a really beautiful courthouse dome, and we have a lot of ability to see that dome from both Austin Avenue, north and south of the square, and also from Interstate 35. And so we have kind of a special zoning overlay that is just to consider how projects might impact the view of that dome from Austin Avenue, north and south of the square, and also from Interstate 35. And so this project is north of the square along Austin Avenue, and so it gets reviewed. There are a few components that go into this project. And so one of those is that buildings along Austin Avenue in the downtown historic overlay zoning district have to be at least 2 stories tall. And so that would apply to this project. So this needs to be at least 2 stories tall. And then there's an evaluation process that happens through what we call an administrative exception. That's reviewed at the staff level. And so what we do is make a determination about whether the proposed height of the project would block or kind of obscure the view of the courthouse dome. So not the courthouse in its entirety, but the courthouse dome. So basically from the top of the coping, or if you can imagine kind of the flat part of the roof, to the top of the statue is the view that we're trying to protect. And so this has to go through that review process. And that's an administrative exception by staff. And the staff reviews that. And so that's an application process that also has to be completed before the site development plan can be approved. And so that is in process right now and hasn't been fully completed yet. So we have a lot of applications in process for this project, and really Harc's decision on the building design and the certificate of appropriateness is kind of that first step.
Brittany, interject really quickly. This is Whitney again. I would like to point out that we have done a full analysis of the height of this building in compliance with the courthouse view protection corridor. And not to speak ill of our neighboring property, but the Tamaru building to our south actually currently blocks the courthouse view of the view of the courthouse dome. And our civil engineer has provided appropriate calculations and documentation to show that our building height as currently proposed does not supersede the Tamaru's current position and does not block the courthouse view corridor in any additional capacity that the Tamaru building doesn't already do, if that makes some sense. A little bit complicated, but we're feeling as though our building is in compliance with the regulations and allowances to meet those guidelines.
Thank you, Whitney and Britton. That's helpful. Any other questions from the commission?
I have a question. This is Terry. Hi.
And I have a question after Terry.
Perfect.
Okay. My question is about I mean, it's a large building, obviously, for Georgetown. But I mean, I like the area it's in for its size, but can we talk a little bit about, and you might move back to some slides, Britton, about the height in relation to the variation of the building, of the variation of the facade. And I thought, you know, we were supposed to kind of step the building back and provide variation and articulation. And I'm just curious what what staff's take is on that. And if we could just talk about that a little bit.
Great question. And so trying to go backwards all the way to the new rendering at the start. So if you'll indulge me one moment. Okay, there we go. So one of the things that our design guidelines calls for, and I think if we were to kind of use it as a general principle, it's calling for variation in larger projects. I think this is a larger project. I think the footprint of the building makes it a larger project, and I think the number of floors within that footprint make it a larger project. So what our design guidelines, kind of the general policy and what the design guidelines are asking for is for variation in the building design. And so that can be accomplished in a number of ways. And so our design guidelines talk about using a building module that's a traditional building width or about 30 feet wide to kind of make it look like a series of storefronts or a series of buildings that would be more like the buildings around the square. So the buildings around the square between about 20 feet to 50 feet in width, and each of those individual buildings that were constructed differently, different times by different people with different materials, with different facade appearances. So our design guidelines essentially say, even in area 2, the area outside of our courthouse square blocks, we're asking for buildings to provide a similar type of variation in the form or the shape of the building. And so that's one way to accomplish that the design guideline highlights, is to use that module or that width and then vary what the building looks like within that module along the street facade. In this case, this building really has 2 street facades. One is an Austin Avenue facade, and then the other is the 5th Street facade. 4th Street is really along the proposed parking lot for this project. And so another way to accomplish that is to do so through variation in materials or variation in the building height. And so this building does have a little bit of variation in height with kind of that center section where you see the signage. That's where the material kind of changes, where we've got the stucco facade. And then in that middle portion, which is a little bit taller, it changes to the stone and then back to the stucco. But it is a really consistent building appearance. It's a really consistent facade. And then also the change in height is only 2 feet between the parapets. And so you're not getting a great variation in the height. Another thing that our design guidelines point to is stepping back upper floors to kind of reduce the height of the building at the property line. That's an option that you could take that would again provide some variation. And so that's where we're looking for Harc's feedback or potentially for comments for the architect, is to say, is this something that Harc believes is this project design something that you think gives the kind of variation that is kind of illustrated in the design guidelines, or is this something that doesn't accomplish the variation that's highlighted either through the building form, the shape of it, through the building height, or through the building materials, are kind of the main ways that the design guidelines say that can be accomplished. Is that helpful?
It is, but I want to just follow up. So as it relates to this specific building, then would it be more important for that aspect to kind of be conveyed along the, I think that's the 5th Street facade, since it's right up against the property line, whereas it looks like the Austin one, or maybe I'm looking at a different, I don't know what corner I'm looking at right now. Is the parking lot on Austin?
The parking lot is kind of, if you're on Austin Avenue and you're kind of looking at the site, if you're, pretend you're standing in the middle of the street. If you're standing in the middle of Austin Avenue and you're looking east and you're looking at what is now an empty lot, if this building were built, what you would then see is the building on the right half of the site, and then the parking lot on kind of the left half of the site. Okay. So along Austin Avenue, you're seeing a building, and then you're also seeing the parking lot.
Okay, all right. Okay, thanks, that helps.
Of course.
Catherine, did you have a comment?
Yes, I do. So my comment relates to exactly what we've been talking about. It seems that the variation in
You know where they are? See ya.
Can somebody please mute?
Scott, would you mute your microphone?
If everybody would mute except for me and Britton, I think would be helpful. Thank you. So as it concerns 13.3, 4, 5, and 6, I think the variations are so minor to give the building an appearance of, well, it just looks monolithic to me. And the variation seems pretty minor in terms of what the overall mass is supposed to be conveying a more human aspect. And so either stepping it down from the height or having the facades have some variation. And I would think that my main comment is there is a total lack of variation. In other words, if you're driving down the street, you would never see how much it is stepped back. You might see a little bit on the height. And so the overall mass seems too great for me personally.
And so one of the things that and I provided 2 letters to the commissioners to help understand the design concept behind the building, because I think that's an important part of the communication of the design. And so when the architect provided kind of the initial letter of intent, and then a follow-up letter, and in that follow-up letter, they talked about the design of the building. And Whitney, I'll certainly give y'all the opportunity to speak to that too. I just want to start the discussion. So one of the things that the architect highlighted for Harc's consideration is that there isn't really the same kind of traditional storefront in this part of the downtown that we see around the square. And so around the square, we're pretty familiar with the buildings being the 20, I looked it up, about 20 to 50 feet wide for those buildings. And then off the square, those storefronts and kind of that same building characteristic kind of continues off the square to some extent. In some cases, it's only a block. In some cases, it might be a couple of blocks. And so in this part of the downtown overlay district, as you go north from our square, that characteristic changed a little bit. You're looking more often at larger buildings that have parking lots, whereas our square doesn't have parking lots. You're looking at buildings that are a little bit newer. And you saw in the earlier slide, we don't have as many historic structures immediately surrounding this. And so the architect's goal that they were trying to express with this building, I think, was not trying to replicate a Main Street storefront here, where it maybe didn't have as much visual connection to our historic storefronts, but to do something that did have a little bit more of a characteristic of a monumental building, something that maybe did have that larger scale and read as a larger complete building. And so that was one of the things they were looking at when they were doing the design, and that's one of the comments that they made in that letter. But Commissioner Morales, if you don't mind, I think it'd be helpful to have the architect mention some ideas about the design and where that concept came from and how that's been expressed here.
Well, I was just thinking of, I know that Eats on 8th site was not on the square, and it is appreciably closer to the square than this building, but the size and mass of this building reminds me of the original rendering of that particular building that improved immensely when it was stepped back and had some variation in height. And since this is a building that is going to have a ground level that's dedicated to one type of institution, from what I read, and the rest of it is office buildings or offices just leased out to various and sundry, I just don't see quite the difference. I understand what you're saying, Britton, but it still seems too monolithic for Georgetown, if I can say that.
Well, and I think that was where staff was looking for feedback from the commissioners exactly on this kind of topic and comparing what the design guidelines illustrate to the building that's been presented and kind of having the opportunity to talk through some of those differences.
So Whitney, I don't know if you want to add anything. I do have some comment along those lines, if you want me to make that first, or if you'd like to comment. You're muted.
Sorry. I would like to maybe make a quick address to the commissioners and the board here tonight. So Britton did a very good representation of our design typology that we are trying to portray with this building. So one of the things, so I am actually a historic preservationist by both degree and training. And one of the things that when I see groups representing with a module typed Main Street frontage is we're portraying to the public that we have a multi-tenant first floor occupancy. This building does not have that and will not have that. The building is going to be the namesake building for that first floor tenant, which is our bank, as you can see in the renderings that we have presented to you. So one of the things that we didn't, that both I have as a kind of true to nature historic preservationist, but also I don't like to mislead the public. When you do, if we were to be requested to break this building up into more of a modularized unit, I think it conveys to the public that there are more than one tenant in this first floor structure. And to me, that is a misrepresentation of the type of building that this is set to emulate or mimic, which, as Britton mentioned, would be a typical traditional building of importance, similar to things like courthouses, post offices, banks, jails. The other thing that I want to point out is this building is positioned around three large single entity, well, not single entity, but larger monolithic structures, with the Tamaru building being to its south, the old jail being to its north, and the new jail that is within very clear view shot of this building across Austin Avenue. So we have three buildings right in its adjacency that are of similar proportion and scale in a single kind of building typology that don't relate to the Main Street modularized unit that we're trying to portray. As Britton mentioned, that begins to break down, farther north, that we go down Austin Avenue, breaks out pretty quickly away from the square. So to me, if we try to portray this unitized or modular scenario, you're actually replicating something that would have never existed at this point within the city build out, and is representative by the buildings that surround it as well. So, you know, when I think about a building that is a single tenant, and we're representing a bank, banks were traditionally built with stone. They were built with larger units. They're meant to mimic and represent longevity and permanence. And so the use of the stone materials along the first floor level is calling back to the historic timeframes of our courthouses, our post offices, and our jails and bank buildings that were meant to be representative of always being there and being a constant protector and oversight to our citizens and our communities. And so I really wanted that sense of both presence and longevity to be present at this building. And yes, the second floors do have an opportunity for varying levels of professional offices. You know, right now we don't know what that could look like. It could be one tenant occupying the entire second floor, or it could be 4 or 5. At this time, we don't have any direction on that. The design is also indicative of those historic structures where they would be entered from the center of the building, sometimes on all 4 sides. Typically courthouses were entered on all 4 sides. That's one of the reasons we have represented the same central stone element on the Austin Avenue side. We do not have access off of Austin Avenue. The security and entry requirements for the banking institute really only want a few entrances for obvious reasons. And we also wanted to provide entrances for pedestrians off of 5th Street and the vehicular traffic off of the 4th Street entry access. So I'm happy to expand on that anymore if anyone would like. We did utilize variations in parapet height. The design guidelines don't provide a range or a recommendation for variation in the vertical articulation. I did choose to elevate the central portion, wanting to both call attention to the entry of the building, but to really create a formal central massing element that you would typically find in traditional buildings of this style as well.
Thank you, Whitney. That gives us some great context. I do have several comments that I think fit into that area. After looking at this project and reading your letter, I do understand going with more of a monument building in your use and where this building is located. What I do have some questions about are, I think one thing that for me is problematic in this building, and I think if you were to look at some of the other new construction, even closer to our square, if we could possibly look at the 2nd and 3rd floor windows, I think the use of these wider, more, I don't know, modern, I guess, windows is not really as in keeping. If you were, would there be a possibility of possibly looking at taller, more slender windows that again would give you more of a historic feel to this building? And again, when you're, you know, pedestrian looking up, you would have slender, narrow windows versus these very, I think, common windows in a large building like this. So that would be one suggestion. Also on the windows, I would have a question about, I see that you had several options, a couple different color variations, black, and then also I think a bronze. Is that correct?
Yes, we chose to offer the 2 variations, black or bronze, and those are meant to mimic a traditional steel window that you would find in an older traditional building. At this time, I wanted to give the owner some flexibility in his color choice later on, but if that needs to be decided upon as part of these proceedings, we're happy to accommodate.
I think, you know, both of those colors are definitely, in my opinion, better than aluminum. Black would be my preference, but but I do think a darker tone. But I actually really think what's problematic for me is the shape of these windows. I think if we would look at a taller window that would be more, on your bottom, you have your windows with a transom above, which, harks back to more historic. I'm not suggesting a transom per se, but something different on those other two floors of windows. And then my other comment would be possibly a use of canopies. Again, I understand you're not wanting to mirror a facade and give the impression that we have, 6 or 7 different retail locations on the bottom. But again, canopies that would go around the first floor could, again, add some dimension to the building and also hark back to what would have been, what is more in keeping with our historic square. So that would be a thought that I would have as well. And then on the Austin Avenue side, I just heard you say, there's a reason why you don't want an entrance on that side. And I understand that, but I do think, again, as a pedestrian walking on these sidewalks, I don't want a pedestrian looking up at a massive structure, and our design guidelines do talk about street facing facades, and that is a street facing facade, especially when you're going to add a sidewalk. So again, I think additions of canopies on that side would be one way of addressing, and making that a little bit more pedestrian friendly on that side. So I don't know about thoughts on any of that, or if the other commissioners have thoughts on any of those as well.
If you don't mind me asking a question. So one of the things that this site is challenged with is we have a very significant grade differential between the 5th Street side of the property and the 4th Street side of the property. So one of the things that is not, that we are, that is difficult to read in these elevations, and we have actually done design elements in order to minimize this feeling, is that grade differential. We have almost 6 feet of fall from the top of the site to the bottom of the site. So we have actually, what you're seeing in this imagery with the large planning area adjacent to the Austin Street side of the property is to be able to screen a required retaining wall that we have to have in order to manage and mitigate the grade differential. And we've done this in such a manner that we don't have to use unsightly guardrails and things like that for fall protection and the safety of the public. So the concern that I have, if we start trying to mimic a storefront scenario along the Austin Street side, is the sidewalk is not at that elevation, and it is not currently. We have a significant grade differential even towards that 5th Street corner along that property line. And so the grading that the sidewalk would need to follow to be adjacent to the street is not the same as where the building elevation needs to be. I hope that helps to make a little bit of sense, and I can elaborate more. Britton, if you go back to the street view that you had, that may be more evident. So yeah, this is a good example. So you'll see the dark gray portion at the bottom is actually the natural street elevation. So in order to allow for the public access along 5th Street, which we wanted to provide a pedestrian level access, the building that sets the elevation of the 1st floor, which does not follow the streetscape elevation. So the Austin Street elevation isn't really, it doesn't really lend itself to the storefront type of a scenario because of the grade differential that currently exists on site.
Okay, that's helpful. Yes, I mean, I do see that, and I do understand not wanting to have an entrance there. I just, don't want us to have a building facing, that's street facing to Austin that isn't somewhat pedestrian friendly. So I don't know exactly how to fix all of that, but I think there's something that needs to occur there, so we're not just, pedestrians aren't just looking up at a very flat, very, building. So that would be my comment there. I don't know if you want to address the windows, or if that is that.
Yeah, I'm curious actually, Whitney, what you think about a a thinner window, I mean, what would that do to the building that you have designed here?
I'm sorry, a center window. I don't know that I am following the reference.
Thinner window.
A thinner, oh, narrower. Yes, we'd be happy to evaluate that as far as the overall design. You know, obviously when you're talking about leasability of current trends in developmental projects, more natural light is always better. So we wanted to try to maximize the opportunity for natural light entering the building. And so that was the reason for the wider windows that would be a little bit of a different variation than the traditional window typology, but we're happy to evaluate that and take a look at that as well.
Okay, thank you. What other questions do we have for the applicant or for staff? Okay. The only other thing that I have, Britton addressed, but I did want to ask the applicant, you know, from a pedestrian safety and an automobile safety flow, what consideration have you all taken there? I mean, we've all driven on both 4th and 5th Street, and you know, there are, especially when you come out of what would be your parking lot and then turn on to that street. I think that's 5th, or is that 4th? Anyway. And then you would, you know, go out towards Austin Avenue. You can take a right there, but taking a left is challenging. So have you all thought about that access and flow and pedestrian and automobile safety there?
Britton, would you mind going to our site plan, please? I want to make sure I've got my orientation correct. Can you zoom in at all? Well, okay, we can leave it here. So right now, if you are looking at this plan, for sake of not using north, south, east, and west, I'm going to say plan left and plan right because that helps to make sense a little bit. Oop. I need to be able to see the Austin. So are you talking about the access from the, got to make sure I get my numbers right, 5th Street side where the Tamaru building is, about your concerns about turning at that intersection? Or are you talking about the intersection adjacent to the old jail?
I mean, both. I think you can address both, but the jail side is the side that is, you know, when you're coming out of your parking lot or out of your teller, you can either turn into the neighborhood or you can turn to your left, which would be to go out towards Austin Avenue.
Yes, so that was one of the reasons we chose to utilize the existing driveways that are currently there. If we were to have to interject or try to provide a second entry to the property, coming off of Austin Avenue is not conducive because of the grade differential that I mentioned earlier. The developmental requirements in order to enter off of Austin Street are counterproductive to the development of the property. So one of the things that we chose to do was continue to utilize the existing driveways, leaving them set back away from the Austin Avenue so that the public and traffic flows could enter and exit safely onto both 5th and 4th Streets before having to approach and access Austin Avenue. Now, as far as the safety of turning onto Austin Avenue, that's really going to be a question for the city because we don't have jurisdiction over the safety of those intersections. We will be meeting with the city to discuss the intersection at 5th Street and their current crosswalk that is developed at that location. There are some concerns there that where the city has developed that crosswalk just in its current position, because we are allowed to build our building right up to the property line, we are going to be addressing safety concerns at that crosswalk, accessibility, and turning access onto Austin Avenue from the 5th Street intersection at that location. So that is that's part of our SDP review process that Britton mentioned was still in progress.
Okay, thank you. Well, and I am glad that, you know, I think where your drive-through is, it makes a lot of sense because at least you're getting, your people aren't turning directly into the teller lane from Austin Avenue. You have to turn onto the street and then turn in, which does help with the traffic flow there.
Yes, ma'am. We didn't want to have any potential impedance onto either one of those roadways because of the drive-through. You know, the other thing with the drive-through is, you know, in today's society, drive-throughs are not, they could become obsolete in a few years, you know, for hopefully they keep them going. But, you know, we also wanted to provide the owner some opportunities that if the drive-through was no longer necessary, that it could be returned to usable space. And they wouldn't be, the site would still be reflective and could be utilized in such a manner that that was still appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, what other questions do you all have for the applicant or staff? And then Britton, do we want to go back through the 3 areas and make sure we've addressed what you all needed feedback on? So Britton, if you'll go back to the feedback slide.
Give me 1 second. I'm gonna try new tricks here. Okay, so this is Brittany again. Staff was asking for the commissioner's feedback. Of course, you are welcome to give other feedback if needed, but specifically we were asking for feedback on the building form and massing. We should talk about maybe the shape of the building and kind of the perspective from the street, the size of it, and then also the building materials and how those might relate to being situated in our downtown historic district, and then building proportions and how those might also relate to some of our historic buildings in the downtown and kind of building proportions that we see more generally in the downtown district.
Britton, I think we got that, but your audio is doing something strange. So.
I apologize.
Okay. All right, commissioners. So this will come back to us in 2 weeks for a public hearing and a decision on this COA. So we need to, you know, make sure that everyone feels good about their comment tonight. What else do we need to address on this building? Okay, so form and massing, other than what we discussed with the stair stepping down. Catherine and Terry, how are you feeling about next steps here?
I'm more okay with it than I was after kind of thinking about the area that it's in. And I definitely like the materials. I guess the only thing I would suggest is possibly the size of the windows, but you know, I'm not an architect, so I don't know what that would do to the overall building. So in general, I'm happy with the building.
Okay, thank you. Catherine, is there anything, I'm not putting you on the spot, but I want to be sure we're all.
Yes, well, I understand the explanations. However, I still find the form and massing in the first part of the guidelines, 13.3 through 13.6, that the lack of variety still bothers me. And I know that there are other buildings, but when I first moved here and became a Harc commissioner, there was a lot of discussion at the time about you never want to make approving something a precedent for something else. And I heard many commissioners, I was not present when the Tamira building was approved, that they were sorry that they approved anything that large and that sort of blocked the courthouse view. Though because I wasn't here, I can't speak to why that was done or how that was done. But just because there is another building that is in the area is, to me, not enough reason to say, oh, it's okay because we approved one before. And I know we really try hard, and other people can comment on whether if we say yes to something, it's not making a precedent for saying yes to something in the future.
Thank you, Catherine. I think I do just want to clarify. I want Britton, if you could clarify, because we do get a lot of questions about height and mass and scale. This building is within the height requirements, again, at the normal level, and then we have a parapet that is allowing for that additional height. Just want to clarify.
Yes, this is Britton. So I'm going to go back to the Austin Avenue elevation that's got.
Something feels weird with your audio.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not really sure why. Can you hear me a little bit better now?
We can make out what or I can make out what you're saying. You just have a grumble.
My tummy's hungry. No, I'm kidding. So on the elevations, that's where some of that more technical information is located for the floor heights, kind of relative to the building floor. And so what are, we have a few different things at play here as far as requirements. Our downtown overlay district allows for a building height up to 40 feet. And that is measured at the top of the flat roof. And so you're seeing that third floor TOP, 40 feet. That is measuring kind of where the top of the flat roof is. And then we see more building above that, and it's marked as a low parapet, a mid parapet, and a high parapet. That low parapet, mid parapet, high parapet are giving you the heights above that flat roof. And that parapet is like a short wall that goes around the top of the building. And that can accomplish a few different things. We do have parapets on buildings in our downtown pretty regularly. So the alternate is to have a sloped roof that has either a hip style or a gable style, things that we're used to seeing, more that pyramid or triangle shapes. But that helps to kind of screen the top of the building. And it also helps to screen or hide rooftop mechanical equipment so that additional screening is not required to cover those things up from the street view. One of the things that I think might be kind of worth pointing out in this building, if you're looking at the top, is that, so we've got about 7 feet between, for that parapet wall that mostly goes around the building. And then where it's noting the high parapet, those are those design features in the center that Whitney had talked about. Kind of the center portions where the building gets another 2 feet taller. One of the things that I'm seeing there is that those parapets, that decorative element, it has what we call a cornice on it. So kind of a decorative cake topper, if you will. Those are pretty...
Excuse me, Britton. Please, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry to interrupt. I think there's some commissioners that are having some problems with audio, and I wondered if we could just take 2 minutes to try a couple things so that we can hear this great explanation that you're providing.
Thanks, Sophia.
Please excuse me. Thank you.
Can y'all hear me through my laptop?
Britton, if possible, I don't know if you can call in using the dial-in number and maybe mute yourself. That might be it.
Yes, I can try that.
We can also hear you, I think, okay with just your laptop.
Yes, you sound much better now, Britton.
Okay, so if I'm talking just without my headset, everybody can hear that. I'm seeing nods. Okay.
You sound great right now. Thank you.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that. My pen died on me, and apparently my headphones are too. So sometimes the old-fashioned technology and the new gets you. So I'll go back to the start. And what I was talking about is the height of the building and how we're looking at that. So to get to the very beginning of my explanation, the building height in our downtown overlay district is limited to 40 feet. And so you're seeing where the elevation on the right side, it says third floor TOP, 40 feet. That's giving the height of the top of this flat roof. So there's a flat roof on this building instead of a sloped roof that we see more on residential buildings. A flat roof is pretty typical for a commercial building, and we have a lot of them both on historic and new buildings in our downtown. You see 3 more markers above that So there's a low parapet, 43 feet 6 inches, a mid parapet at 47 feet 0 inches, and a high parapet at 49 feet 0 inches. A parapet feature is a low wall that goes around the top of a flat roofed building. And we do that for a couple of reasons. Sometimes it's used to add some architectural interest to a building. And so that's part of why you see this here. The low parapet area is kind of a decorative area where we see these bands of that stone material. And so it kind of matches with the first floor, and you get up to the third floor and there's something and it kind of reflects that. So you see that material repeated, and then you see some three-dimensional kind of building decoration up there. The mid parapet that's being shown is really kind of the top of the building. In general, that's the highest point of this building. So at 47 feet, that gives you a parapet wall height, or a height above the top of the roof, of 7 feet. And that 7 feet has these decorative architectural features. It also serves to screen the rooftop mechanical equipment. And so air conditioning condensers, you might have one in your side yard or your backyard. For commercial buildings, they're larger. They're a bit taller sometimes, and our code requires those to be screened. So if you do a taller parapet wall, there's not additional screening that's needed to hide those from the street view. So that parapet wall can accomplish a few different features on a building. And that's why you're seeing those different heights shown. It's saying the top of the building is 40 feet above the slab. The low parapet, where we see the top of that decorative feature, is at 43.5 feet. And what we can mostly see is the top of the building is what's called the mid parapet there at 47 feet. Then we get up to 2 more feet, 49 feet 0 inches, for the very top of that, that decorative element, that vertical element in the center. And so parapet walls per our code are allowed to be 10 feet at most above a roof height. So you could kind of theoretically go with a 40-foot building height, you could go up to 50 feet with a parapet, and this building is proposed to be 49 feet. That 49 feet is just for those kind of limited features though. And so we're still working on the site plan. And so I want to make sure we kind of have the opportunity to work with the civil engineer on some of staff's comments. And I don't want to get too much into that here because we're not agendized for it, but in the site plan, we're working out things like the details for how that sidewalk gets constructed. We're working out details for site grading and things like that. And so we still have a few features that we're working out on the site. And Whitney had talked about how much it slopes, and that's true. This site, from the top, very tippy top, to kind of the very lowest curb where the city's curb is quite a height difference. And so some of that plays into our perception of this building, because the building slab needs to be flat. And so where you're seeing those heights are measured off that building slab. If you were on the corner of Austin Avenue and 4th Street, the building floor would be higher in relationship to you because your feet are lower than the floor of this building, if that makes sense. And so some of your perception of this building is going to change depending on where you are in relationship to it. And these drawings are showing kind of where the building height is in relationship to the slab. And that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of height evaluation. And so that gives the opportunity for this building to be 3 full floors plus that parapet height, but also my understanding is going to act to screen that mechanical equipment that we require to be screened as part of our code.
Okay, thank you, Britton. I just wanted to clarify that we were within, this building is currently within the height requirement. So, okay, thank you. So for me, Whitney, I mean, as I said, I think, you know, the windows, looking at what that might look like, and then working on this pedestrian street facing facade. And then for me also the dimension, I don't have a problem with the materials. The materials don't relay a lot of dimension to them. And so, you know, something that would give some dimension, whether that be canopies or whatever that looks like, but something that would provide some dimension would be my feedback. Anyone else? Steve, Art, anything you'd like to contribute this evening?
Yes, thanks for asking. Uh, Two of the things I think that is most important with regards to a conceptual review is that you are able to work on areas of compromise, which indeed can enhance the project. So I would like to ask the applicant, I do think I understand this right, but you're asking for us to approve the two different materials that are to be used on the exterior of the building, and then you make the choice downrange which one is cost effective.
Yes, sir, that is correct. They both have they both visually appear the same and have the same color and tonal values as well as surface characteristics. It's just one is a man-made material versus a natural material.
Okay, then thank you for that. Then number two is that, as you are aware, the criteria for approval of any project basically within the historical district is how that project matches up with the guidelines and the UDC. And taking into consideration that your project basically only partially complies with 8 different guidelines for the historic district, I think that it would be beneficial if there was some way that you could look at those areas of where you only partially comply, which is 8 different areas, 13.3. In fact, I could, round them off, but they're all listed. If there was some way when you go back prior to coming back to us, if there was extra effort that was made to try to bring those partially complied guidelines into as close as you could possibly get to complying. And I will cite, if you will, as per example, 13.4. And so there we're basically talking about an area that has to do with the residential area that is to the east of your project. 13.4 basically talks about a larger development should step down in height toward the street or smaller surrounding structures. I fully understand your explanation. I read in detail your communique of August the 28th. So I fully understand, and I can exempt and I can accept 13.3, okay, for security reasons, this is why we're doing that. I understand that. And so it is my intent to understand any of the guidelines that you do not completely comply with. And so I go back to my original statement. A larger development should step down in height toward the street or smaller surrounding structures. I read the August 28th comments with regards to staff asking the questions for the design guidelines 13.3, 13.4, 13.5, and 13.6. And under the responses, while most of them have to do, in my opinion, with regards to cosmetics, some does touch upon, and then I'll go back, and I had never heard the word before, but when we're talking about frontage typology. And so then I'm beginning to think, is there any way that you can go back and look at stepping down your project on the east side so that it fits better with that residential area? Can't hear you.
Well, Britton, will you flip to the next slide? So one of the things that myself and the owner can definitely discuss would be a reduction in the third floor positioning that you see toward the right side of that drive-through area. Again, we did try to be respectful of the residential area to that nature. You know, I know our covered parking area may not look like much, but it does respond to a similar scale that their driveways and their garages also represent and present. Again, the design of this building is such that if the drive-through were to ever become obsolete, that building, that lower section that is currently open, could be infilled in a manner that was consistent with the architectural design elements of the floors above, such that we don't want it to ever look like it was infilled and have it be an afterthought. So we've taken care in the design of the upper floors that happen over the drive-through to allow for infill development at a later date that is respectful of the overall architectural aesthetic and proportions of the building. Obviously the client would like to provide his tenants the greatest opportunity of usable floor area, which is why we tried to capture as much horizontal space as we could. We actually could have extended the building over the covered parking area that you see to the right of this image. We chose not to allow, to attempt to try to be recognized and respectful to those the neighboring townhome developments. I would like to point out, when the townhome development was done back in 2004, a 3-story multi-purpose commercial development was approved for this site. At the time, those residential units were designed and planned. Unfortunately, that development was never built, but that was the intent of all time, of the entire development, with that, when those townhomes were planned for this site, a similar type of a building was planned for this property as well. So we definitely can talk about that more. It does does become difficult in order to think about how to step the building back appropriately and maintain a appropriate aesthetic for the client's future uses of the building if the drive-through does become obsolete in the future.
Then thank you. And I feel fairly safe in assuming that you understand my concerns.
Yes, sir. I would like to clarify something from you, Mr. Browner, if you don't mind. You know, the design guidelines state the stepping down of the street toward, stepping down toward the street, yet we are allowed by right to have a building that's 40 feet tall plus the additional parapet height allowable. So we really have a conflict in the design guidelines, because I'm being allowed a building of the height that I have shown and we have designed, yet I've got a conflicting design guideline that tells me I'm supposed to step the building down. So I'm a little bit confused of how the best way to comply when I actually meet the ordinance that allows me the building height that I currently have presented.
Okay, well then, what I would say with regards to that is that you are aware of what my concerns are. So when you come back before us, you have a clear understanding of where I am going to go with regards to questions.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Art. Anything else? Okay. Steve, is there anything you'd like to add this evening?
There we go. No, I don't. I guess my question is, are you looking for some sort of final decision or a vote this evening, or is this just a kind of a workshop?
No, this is a conceptual review. We will have a public hearing and a vote on this item on the 8th. So we do need to, be sure that the applicant has all the questions and comments to take back, before they come before us on the 8th.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Britton and Whitney, do you feel like you have what you need to move forward with any changes, or, how you'd like to move forward with this building in the next couple weeks?
I still have a little bit of reservation about the request to make the Austin Street side more pedestrian friendly, almost like the representation of the storefront mentality, due to the inherent natures of this site and the grading that we have. The two don't really go together. So I'm concerned that we're going to be asked to make a building appear to be residential in nature and not actually have an opportunity to access it in that manner. So to me, we're portraying something that can't be achieved currently with the allowances the city is providing for us in the right of way. And I know that is a different conversation and that is outside the purview of this group, but we are limited with what we can do within the right-of-way development guidelines where the sidewalk is located. And so I am struggling a bit because of the site slope that we are dealing with, that I cannot change, that are outside of my control, to be requested to make that side of the building be representative of something that I can't achieve physically because of the site slope. So while I understand your comment may not be necessarily suggesting I add storefront or some sort of mimicked front entry, even a canopy and things like that, I'm still going to deal with the grade differential. And as Britton mentioned earlier, this building is going to be imposing because of that. And whether I step the building down or add canopies, I'm still going to be bound by the grade differential that faces this site along Austin Avenue. So I want to just make that kind of statement to the group that I'm fighting an uphill battle per se, because that is not something I have control over. And I'll do my best to try to modify accordingly and provide an appropriate solution to that, but I don't know exactly to what extent I'm being asked to try to make it more pedestrian friendly when the building sidewalk adjacent to it is below the floor of the building itself, 5 feet. We're not talking 4 inches, we're talking multiple feet of differential between where the building actual floor plane is and where the sidewalk is.
Okay, yes, that, we understand. I think that you're working with the grade of the lot there. Britton, as you get back with this applicant and the architect, would there be options for you all to talk about some ways to make some of these things work a little bit better moving forward?
Well, I think my question to Harc, and this is the conceptual reviews for us to be able to ask these questions and dialogue with the applicant directly on anything that the commissioners might have concerns about before we go to the public hearing portion of the application. And so because this is not the only application for this project, we have other applications and we do need to continue to meet with the project team. And so we have the opportunity to discuss what resolution might look like for some of the commissioners' comments. I think I would also ask the commissioners, is there information that staff need to bring back to you in the next time we meet on this application? Is there any information that the commissioners might need that staff did not present or provide today to help y'all in your assessment of the project?
Okay, Commission, is there anyone what else do we all need to see to Britton's question for our next public hearing on this item?
Britton, I would just echo some of the things that Art mentioned. When there are so many things that say partially comply, to make sure that there are there's enough explanation in the data that you provide to us, and you always provide us fulsome data. So I'm not expecting this to be an issue at all as to why certain things would be logical to be approved in spite of them not complying. And that would be the only thing I would request. But I'm expecting you would provide it anyway.
And you're going to get historic pictures.
I do have another question that expands on your comment, Commissioner Morales. There are a lot of items that do say partially comply. However, some of those areas say we only have to comply with one of them, and the building does. So I'm confused as to why some of these items are listed as partially complying when we do, in fact, meet requests that are being presented in some of these subsections regarding materials or the use of the development of a ground floor, things providing the pedestrian access as things like landscaping to provide that pedestrian feel. And we have provided those types of elements. So I would like for Britton, when we meet next time, to explore why the staff listed these areas as partially compliant, because I feel like we have met a lot of those guidelines and want to make sure I understand why they were listed in that manner so we can appropriately address them if they need be.
Absolutely. We can absolutely do that.
And Whitney, I have one other question about materials. I think it was Art who asked the question about there are several options that you presented, but then, you know, for me, it's always nice to know what materials we're using. And, you know, I think more importantly, not only see those in a small form, but in some way that they have been utilized somewhere else, so installed. So is that something that because I don't think that we typically like to, you know, look at projects without really knowing what the materials are going to look like. So.
Sure. I actually, in my written response, I thought I had addressed that. You know, I know that there was a conversation regarding the stone, the smooth stone representation that we have presented, and Britton did show some examples of there are actually 3 stone types that she presented. One of them was a smooth cut stone option. One is what was called a pillowed face, which is actually done, yeah, perfect. So the smooth stone is in the left image. At the middle portion is a smooth cut stone facing, which I believe is currently present on your courthouse. The pillowed stone is what you see directly below it, which is a mechanically done chisel to the face of the stone that is also present within the downtown area. And then you see the more natural stone facings that you have in the middle imagery. So the other thing to think about with these various types of stone types is pillowed stone and smooth cut stone are more expensive materials traditionally. They were more expensive to create and produce because people were hand cutting these things out of the earth. And so you typically only found those types of stone types on your governmental or more monumental buildings that I have already mentioned in our previous conversations. And so again, we chose to utilize a smooth stone application to mimic those more important or governmental type building typologies that would be found of banking institutions, jails, and otherwise. We are requesting the use of stucco on the building that is going to be representative of a traditional plaster, which is present within the downtown buildings and other buildings throughout the city of Georgetown. That is not a unique material that is being done as both a aesthetic choice, but also for cost reasons. And so I feel like both materials that we have presented are well represented within the Georgetown material availabilities, the examples of that. If I need to bring those with me to our next meeting, I'd be happy to show some of those examples so we can see how those are currently represented. But they are currently in use in the Georgetown area, both in the downtown district and surrounding both new development and and historic developments. These are not new materials to the city of Georgetown.
Right, and the cast stone and the stucco are the building. The pillowed stone is the retaining wall, correct?
So the retaining wall is being proposed as an option for a unitized masonry. So that is a design system that is self-supporting, where we don't have to put a concrete retaining wall behind it. It is a man-made object. It is not natural stone. And so we would be utilizing that, though most of it will be screened behind landscaping that we will be providing in our retaining walls. But the coloration, surface characteristics, those would be more similar to the natural stone look, which would be traditionally found in a retaining wall type of an application.
Okay, so then that's what I'm not clear on. So the pillowed stone versus the cast stone, where are those being utilized?
I don't have any pillowed stone. Okay. So Britton, will you go to the slide 21, please? There you go. So we are suggesting the use of either cut stone or cast stone. Both materials have the same aesthetic representation. That means they look the same. However, and that is done specifically. Cast stone is made to mimic cut stone, or it can be made to mimic any kind of stone, honestly. But in this application, we're using it to mimic cast stone to give the client an opportunity for some cost-saving options. It looks the same, it touches the same. It does require an additional sealer on the stone, the cast stone. Excuse me, let me make sure my terminology is correct. However, it does weather in a similar manner, and maintenance is very similar to cut stone.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Okay, so Britton, what other information do we need to clarify but for you before moving on?
I think I am good as far as requesting feedback. Y'all did give some points on the design guidelines, and so I think we've accomplished what staff has asked for in terms of Harc's feedback. Thank y'all so much for kind of going through this lengthy discussion. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Whitney. I'm assuming you'll meet with Britton and you all can walk through the application. We do appreciate you and the owner hanging with us this evening. I don't know if he's still on the phone or not. You know, like, as I said, these conceptuals, you know, hopefully get us to a place where we have a solid project moving forward. So we appreciate you going through this process with us.
We appreciate everybody's time and consideration. We're excited about the project. We're looking forward. We have, thankfully our firm has got 2 other projects under construction in Georgetown. We're looking forward to another opportunity to be a part of y'all's great community and the continued advancement and architectural aesthetics. So we look forward to the next meeting.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to move on to item F, which is updates from staff.
This is Nat. I know Sophia is joining us. We don't have any updates to share other than we did meet with Post Oak Solutions this week. They were out and about scampering, taking pictures of signage and infill, and they spent a full day today with us and a full day yesterday working on a public engagement plan. So we will, our next step is to update the city council on that public engagement plan and make sure it meets their objectives. And within that public engagement plan are also some goals for us to strive for as we reach out to stakeholders and then the community at large. So we'll be working through an update to the city council and then back to Harc with an overview of our public engagement plan and the general schedule moving forward. So our next update to you should have a schedule of the overall update, but we are shooting to have this thing wrapped up by Preservation Month in May. So it will be fast and furious, but Britton is working hard with the consultants, and we still feel really positive about the team that we've assembled and their understanding and our project. So with that, I don't know if the commission has any questions that need to be answered.
Does anyone have any questions about the projects? Okay. One thing I wanted Britton to touch on, Myrna sent you all today a new sheet to use as we are working through these projects. Britton, do you want to talk about that at all? And then what I had said to Britton is this is great. What I want to be sure we're not doing is giving Britton extra work if this is not something that we're going to utilize. So if you all could please look through that form, Britton can talk about it a little bit, and then I'd like us to maybe try it a few times and then see if what's working or how do we need to tweak it, or is it not something we're utilizing and we can take that off of Britton's plate. So Britton, would you like to say anything about that?
Yes, thank you so much. So Britton again, what we have realized is that y'all get to see the staff reports for applications with staff going through a template for review with the design guidelines, and you see the design guidelines next to a staff analysis. But we wanted to see if y'all would be interested in having your own template to use. And so we kind of began that with the design guidelines in chapter 13, which is area 2 of the Downtown Historic District. And we could expand that out to the chapter 12, area 1 design guidelines, and also the chapter 14 Old Town infill design guidelines, and give you kind of your own tool to go through application materials and kind of check off things or make notes or note which questions you might have when we have our Harc meetings and when we consider applications. So if that's something that looks like it might be helpful, we're absolutely happy to keep developing that with you into a useful resource and tool to use, or if it appears to be kind of too lengthy, or if you think, no, this is not necessary because I'm already using the staff report, we're happy to take that feedback too. We just want to make sure that y'all have the tools that you need for the work that we're asking you to do, and that we have kind of a helpful set of resources for that.
It's Catherine Morales, and my comment is that I found it extremely useful, especially today, because of the complexity of what we were looking at. And I don't want to make extra work for you. I mean, it is possible for us to, have our books open next to us, but having the template and using it has been very useful today. I would say, though, if you have a staff report on something and everything complies and you are recommending approval and there's no controversy, I wouldn't send us a template with those guidelines so that you would not have extra work to do.
I think what we're looking for, y'all are so kind. I like to work, so it's all happy. My hobby and my work are all the same thing. But I think what we'll probably limit it to is, at least for the time being, we do see quite a bit of residential infill in Old Town, and so this is a tool that we would also develop specifically to those design guidelines. And again, just give y'all a template. So it wouldn't be something that we would necessarily have to send out all the time, just give you copies that you could use for different projects. And ultimately where we would probably go with this is you'll have your commissioner manuals that have different templates and paperwork in it. And so this would be something that if it worked out really well, we would include copies in your commissioner manual, so that would kind of be part of our set of materials that you receive as commissioners. In design guidelines, review sheets. Like I said, I have a template that I use, and that makes it a lot easier for me. And we were wondering if a similar thing for y'all would also be helpful. So it's not a lot of work. It's mostly copy paste, a little bit of formatting, some pretty easy paperwork. So I don't feel too burdened by it.
Thank you, Britton. Yes, I think it was very helpful for tonight, and thank you, Catherine, for your comments. If anyone else, wants to send comment to Britton on, how to make that work better, let's do that moving forward. So, thank you all very much. Appreciate you all hanging on for tonight. I know there's a lot, but these infill projects, I think we need to make sure we dot all our I's and cross all of our T's. So, thank you all for hanging in. Okay, item F. I'm sorry. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn, Commissioner Morales.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Steve, second.
Thank you. So motion to adjourn. I will take a vote. Commissioner Parr, yes. Commissioner Morales?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnston?
Yes.
Commissioner Browner?
Yes.
And Commissioner Hyde, is she still with us?
She is not.
Okay. All right, so that passes. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening. We'll see you all in a couple weeks.
Be safe.
Bye-bye.